welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Every 1 hour that you're spent doing this is one more step forward in becoming the artist or the writer or whatever that you are meant to be. So it's not a wasted endeavor if it doesn't hit the shelf and go to the top of the bestseller list when you're 16 years old.
Are you a teen or adult looking for more happiness in every day and ways to connect with people in your life?
You've come to the right place. Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
And we're the two teens behind Small Bits of Happiness.
We're interviewing Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and more.
Throughout all of our episodes, you'll find great conversations, hacks that you can take away and try in your life, inspiration, as well as unique and surprising insights. Today, we are talking with Victoria Aveyard. Victoria Aveyard is an author and a screenwriter.
Victoria is the author of #1 New York Times best-selling book, Red Queen, which she wrote at 23 years old, and me and Mercedes absolutely love it. And with more than 5 million copies sold, it is most definitely a lot of different people's favorite books.
The Red Queen series has also been translated into 41 different languages and counting. Victoria is also the author of the #1 New York Times best-selling series, Realm Breaker. And she now lives full-time in Los Angeles with her dog, Indy. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you guys so much. That was a great introduction.
Oh, thank you. We are so thrilled to be speaking with you today. You are truly such an inspiration and icon and an iconic author. So take us back to the beginning. How did your journey start?
It's always funny when people ask that question because you're sort of like, what do you mean? Do you mean like professionally, or do you mean, when did you first start writing? Or even when did you first think I can do this as a profession? Like those are always different points. I'd been kind of one of those kids who was writing with crayons when I was very little. And I wrote like fan fiction in middle school and high school, but I didn't really click with the idea of potentially studying writing in college or even thinking about it as a career until I was like a big Star Wars geek, and George Lucas went to film school. And that was the first time where I thought, oh my God, people actually study writing and storytelling. And I was also a big movie person as well as a book person. And for some reason in my mind, writing a whole novel felt very intimidating, but somehow writing a screenplay didn't, even though both industries are extremely hard to get into, and no guarantees of any kind and no real structure to it. Writing is such a weird career to get into because you don't really know how to do it. It's not like becoming a lawyer where you do undergrad, you study law, you pass a bar exam. There's no set steps. Every path is different. And we always talk about that, like every path is different. I did a creative writing degree. I studied screenwriting in college. But I also know tons of authors who either studied science or medicine or didn't go to college at all. And it really doesn't delineate where you're going to go. But for me, when I graduated from school with a film degree, and I had written several scripts at that point for my college programs, I still kept coming back to, in my head, writing novels, and specifically writing young adult novels. So at that time, when I was 22, 23, graduating college, I had grown up with Twilight in high school. Like I was the Twilight generation. And I remember going to see like the first movie my freshman year of college, and we had the movie tickets taped on the wall, and it was like the midnight showing. So I like to say, like we were the OGs. And then in college, the Hunger Games books started coming out, the movies started coming out. So I was really sort of a sponge, sucking up that experience. I feel like I really got the full brunt of like the YA boom. So it was very much in the front and center of my mind when I was thinking about storytelling and what kind of stories I wanted to tell next. And when I graduated college, I had this story sort of nugget in my head, and I knew it wasn't a screenplay. I thought it was a YA novel, which is a story I'd always loved reading, and thought like, I'm still very close to young adult, but also very much gravitate towards young adult writing at this point in my career. So what I ended up doing is graduating with a ton of college loans. And I told my parents, like, I want to write a book. Can I move home? And luckily they like me. And we're like, okay, what does that even mean? What does that do? And parents hate when I tell this story at book signings where I'm like, I moved home to write a book, and it worked. And they're always like, shush, don't say that. Don't let our kid get an idea like that. But I moved home, and over the next 6 months, I wrote the first draft of Red Queen at a coffee table in my parents' house back home in a small town in Massachusetts. And when I finished the draft, I got in contact with an entertainment manager in Los Angeles who had been sort of encouraging me through the process and was like, yeah, go do that. Write the YA novel you want to write. And when I got in touch with him and said, here, I did it. What now? He was like, I'm not a manager anymore, but I do know someone at a literary publishing agency in New York. And that kind of kicked off my journey into the professional side of traditional publishing, which I kind of knew nothing about. And in hindsight, I look back and I see all of these bullets that I dodged that I didn't know they were there. But I ended up signing with an agent at that agency after he sent my manuscript over. I didn't know it at the time, but he sent it on a Friday and I hadn't edited it at all. Like my mom had read it for grammar and she was an English teacher at the time. So I had like your commas are all correct read, but there was no sort of traditional editing going on. But my agent was given it on a Friday and she read it by Sunday afternoon. And I remember she followed me on Twitter that Monday morning and I thought, something has happened. This is a literary agent. Don't read into this too much. Don't get your hopes up. And then she emailed me to set up a phone call and we sort of went from there. But that was in January or February of 2013 is when I signed with my literary agent with that first draft of Red Queen. She and I went through a couple of rounds of revisions and we ended up selling it to a traditional publishing house, to HarperCollins in April of 2013. And then it didn't come out until February of 2015. So that sort of gives you an idea of sometimes how long these books take to get from your computer and your, Microsoft Word onto a shelf in a bookstore.
I love that. I think it's so amazing, and we've heard so many different stories about how you find, your own path, because I feel like oftentimes we see all these people talking about how they got there, and we see this is like a ABC path that I need to follow, and then I'll be exactly as successful as them. But that's not always the case, and I think that just knowing that it's up to us to build our own path and to follow what we're genuinely interested in. And it's okay if suddenly our interests are to change a little bit, because that is our own path. That is our own journey. And I love how you said that. That is so inspirational. And I also love how you were able to feel like you could come back home to your parents, because I feel like oftentimes we feel like, oh, well, I'm an adult now. I came out of university and it's time for me to start buy my own house, but, you had your debt and it was time to kind of pick what was more of a priority, to follow what you're genuinely passionate about, or to try to find a job that maybe you weren't as interested in, to try to pay some of that off already. And I think that that's so amazing how you chose what you're genuinely interested in, because choosing your passion is so important.
Yeah, and I also really love how, something I think we can all get out of that story is just trusting the process. And it's okay to kind of feel like you're taking a step back, like maybe moving back home with your parents can feel like you're taking a step back at times, but really it's just a step forward because it's getting you towards your end goal.
But that's very true. And I was so lucky that my parents were supportive of me coming home. I think it was partially like, my God, we cannot afford to supplement you living in Los Angeles while you're writing this book. But it was great that I got to go and be in a place of safety and support. And it was terrifying, of course. I remember halfway through the first draft of Red Queen, I kind of slowed down and stopped writing and thought, what am I even doing? Like, I just had this full education behind me in this wonderful, amazing city, in a place that I've always wanted to be. And now I've just come back home. Have I wasted everything that I've done over the last 4 years? Did I hit my first obstacle and get scared and run home? And I kind of did, but it ended up working out. And it was what I needed to do. I remember midway through Red Queen, I reread Catching Fire, which is my favorite of the 3 Hunger Games books. And I let that sort of fuel me. And I remember feeling so inspired by it and so passionate about the work I was doing. And I that really turned me back around. And also my dad was reading my book as I was writing it. He was reading each chapter as I finished. And when I slowed down so much, he was like, well, if you're not going to finish it, can you at least tell me how it ends? Because I really want to know. And I'm really glad I finished it for him.
I love that so much. I mean, just having some of that motivation and especially having people who motivate you are so important, because by surrounding yourself with people who believe in you, who want to see you succeed, and who genuinely want to push you and support you to becoming the best version of yourself is so important. Yeah. But, you know, your journey sounds like it's been amazing. It's been a bit of a roller coaster.
We just want to quickly say, check out our happiness wellness products designed by us for individuals of all ages to help you bring a small bit of happiness to your home with our tangible tips and tools. Check them out in the show notes.
And that's a good point about every journey being different. One question I get a lot, especially from young writers, they feel this pressure to be published so young, like before they even get to college. When they're in high school, I get students asking, you know, I'm having a really hard time writing this. What should I do? What do I do when I finish it? And people feel demotivated. And it's sort of like with writing especially, or with any other kind of creative skill, even if you like finish a book and it doesn't go anywhere, it's not a wasted effort. You know, they say that 10,000 hours makes you an expert. Like every 1 hour that you're spent doing this is one more step forward in becoming the artist or the writer or whatever that you are meant to be. So it's not a wasted endeavor if it doesn't hit the shelf and go to the top of the bestseller list when you're 16 years old. And I also think for so many young people, like it's really important to experience your life and find out who you are and not fully focus on one thing. That was something I really got out of my college education. Was I was in a very large university and I met people outside my major, outside of my interests, outside of my personal experience who really shaped me and kind of let me grow into who I was supposed to be.
I love that. Yeah. And I think that oftentimes, like, I fully understand what, you know, sometimes we create something or we write something or, you know, we didn't do as well in a soccer game. But in the end, those are all still hours that you're doing towards something. Doesn't matter if you fail, doesn't matter if you succeed. In the end, all those hours are going towards the bigger picture. And I think, I remember when I was younger, I was so scared to sometimes like do something like, you know, write down a story idea I had, because I was scared. I genuinely was scared that in the future I would read it and I would be like, this is so badly written. I can't believe I wrote something like that.
That's also like looking back and seeing how far you've come. It's almost like gratifying. Of course, it's very embarrassing, but it's also gratifying when you have those moments when you go back and you're like, oh my God, I thought this was so good. And now I know what my good writing looks like. I do it now with, you know, if I look at the first book in Red Queen and I look at the book I just published, it's totally different. And I feel like I've really improved. That is kind of the curse of being a professional artist, is you're always trying to get better. There's no moment where you kind of feel, okay, I've hit the ceiling, I can, you know, retire or whatever. You're always really pushing yourself. And that motivation allows you to keep working, but it is a bit of an anchor too.
Yeah, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Exactly. But what would you say has been your most significant challenge that you've experienced on this somewhat of a roller coaster? And how did you overcome this challenge?
Probably the biggest challenge I overcame without knowing it was going to be the big challenge, or basically saying like, this was the moment where I chose what my life was going to be, at least the last 10 years. And that was definitely the moment where I chose to keep writing Red Queen, and chose not to get dejected and quit. When I was 22 years old, living in my parents' house, halfway through a manuscript that I never thought would see the light of day. That was definitely the biggest challenge, and pushing myself through that moment with no guarantees of anything on the other side was definitely the biggest challenge. And then in terms of now, once you're in the sort of machine of publishing, it can be a real challenge to focus. There's so many other parts of the job that kick in when you publish that you don't really know go with being a published author. There's stuff like this, there's publicity, there's marketing, there's social media. There's all of these different elements. Like we go out on the road and have to talk about our books to strangers. And these are not things that writers do. Like we're not here because we're good at talking to people. We're not sitting in our homes alone typing books because we like being around other people that much. So it feels really antithetical to our natural skill set, but it is all part of the job. And that can be a challenge, especially because shifting into those mindsets, it's a really hard break. And I'm doing it right now, trying to start a new book. And sort of shut down the noise and get back into it.
Amazing.
For
I think
sure.
like not quitting even when you're like hitting a wall and you're like, oh my gosh, like am I going to go anywhere? Am I going to go anywhere with my book, with my interest, with even like a sport, like anything that you're interested in? There's always like I feel like a wall that you hit. And sometimes the funny thing is, not in all cases, but sometimes you hit the wall and then if you keep persevering, that's when things start to get really exciting and that's when it starts to pick up a little bit. But you have to overcome that initial kind of tough
But I think
points.
also oftentimes, you know, if you feel like, oh, I've been spending so many hours writing, I've been spending so many hours training, I've been doing so much of this that I'm starting to get kind of tired of it, and you're hitting that wall.
Especially if you're not seeing like that. I feel like we as people really crave instant gratification. So if you,
oh my God, so much so, especially in the way that social media has changed and that we want the clicks, we want the likes, we want it immediately. And writing is such a delayed gratification because, like I said, it took 1.5 years for the book to come out. Once I finished it, you gotta put it off and hope that it's gonna be good and do all this other work.
For sure. And I think totally that instant gratification, we constantly crave that, but it can be so hard to achieve, even though because we feel like we're getting motivated by it, but we're also at the same time kind of being held back by it because you're like, wait, what happens if I publish this book and I don't get that instant gratification? And then it kind of makes you afraid. But I think that just doing like, if you find yourself really, really having a difficult time, just taking baby steps, you know, if you're training, start building it up or building it up throughout the week and then calming
writing
down.
writing your book a little bit every day.
Not forcing yourself to sit down for 6 hours and write 10 pages an hour. It can be so much easier to do small things at a time. And you have written so many amazing books, such as the Red Queen series that we're talking about, and the sequel of the book series was released 1 year after the other, which is absolutely amazing. But writing a book takes a lot of time and a lot of pressure on the author. Do you ever feel this type of pressure to write and publish books?
Yeah, especially in YA. And I understand from the business side of it, especially when you're writing a young adult series, your readership is growing and aging. So you want to kind of catch them where they are. And hopefully, like, the books are still sort of in their wheelhouse. It's totally, like, a reader can age out of your series, and you never want that to happen. But writing a book a year, especially books that are longer, I write, like, upper-level YA, so my books are much longer than lower YA or a middle grade. It's really tough. It's not really conducive to good creative work, especially because, as I said, all of these other parts of the job come in. If I was only writing every day, if I wasn't worrying about making sure I'm present on social media and maintaining a platform and answering emails and doing the administrative side of the work that you really don't know is there, it might be easier, but all of that is very much part of the job. So pressure-wise, absolutely. I have been able to bargain for a little more time between my books. And that just comes with having worked for longer and having that kind of relationship with my agent and my editor where I can push and say, okay, we can wait an extra 6 months. And that also comes with having the readership that I do who are willing to wait for my books and who will still read them even if they're a little bit older. What is really cool right now is because of social media, because of like Book Talk and Bookstagram, I have a lot of new readers who are discovering my books. I was just at a book festival this past weekend and I had readers who were in their 20s telling me, oh my God, I read your books in middle school. And I was like, oh, I feel so old. And then at the same time, I'd have a 13-year-old come up to me and be like, I just started your Red Queen books. I'm so sorry that I'm late. And I'm like, no, this is great. These books still have life and they're still finding new readers and they're still very much for you. And now you can binge read all of them at the same time, even though I like to make you suffer and wait a little bit. But it is cool to see new generations discover something. And there's always this idea that once a series is done, it's kind of going to go away. And I'm really happy that it's not.
Yeah, totally. There's so many advantages to being present on social media. Yes. Obviously, it takes away from your time writing, but there's a lot of benefit.
It is a balance for sure. You definitely see the benefits.
Because I read your books last year. And
Oh,
we
wow.
really got into them because I was 13 last year, and I found me and my friend were reading them around the same time, and she would just finish them so quickly, but she wouldn't have the next book after it. So she would finish the book and she would have to wait like a few days before getting the next one. And she was like, I hate how she always leaves on a cliffhanger because I need to know more, but the problem is I need to wait a few more days until we can go to chapters. And so it was so funny because she was always on the edge of her seat whenever she finished your book.
Yeah, but I feel like there's so much truth in that. It's like there's this constant pressure, especially once your work is known, because before it's published, you know, there's a personal pressure, but then all of a sudden there's all this additional pressure from the outside world.
Because people will say, oh, I hope this happens in the next book. And you'll be writing the next book already like, oh, that's not going to happen. Or you're kind of thinking, wait, is that a good idea? No. And you don't want to get confused. You want to stay true to your vision. So it's really the other benefit to writing a book a year is you kind of stay ahead of the readership. It is fun to look back and see someone think, oh, I think this is going to happen and they got it right, or they predicted something that didn't happen. The worst is when you see someone suggesting something where you think, oh my God, that would have been such a good idea.
Yeah, it's crazy how much people, like, they can come up with such good ideas. Like, sometimes I'm scrolling through the comments and I'm like, whoa, if that happened, like, can you imagine?
For sure. So I just have one quick question. When you're planning ahead for your books, do you have like a whole like storyline planned ahead, like multiple years before you even start writing like the 4th or 5th book?
So I really like to structure my stories in something called 3-act structure. And I structure my books that way, but I also structure the whole series that way. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of it, but it is what most movies and Western stories break down into. If you look at like the original Star Wars trilogy, the first movie is Act 1, the second movie is Act 2, the last movie is Act 3. And I really try and hit that because it's a rhythm that we inherently know and we can kind of feel the story going, and it's really helpful to keep your momentum. So I like to know for an entire series, I really know where it starts. I know where the first book begins. I know where the last book ends. Maybe not the specific details, but I know where the characters end up. And the second act is really kind of where I find my way through the middle. But I always know how my third act ends, how my first act starts. And I also know what is called the lowest point, which is usually the end of the second act when you feel like all is lost in the story. So if you look through my books or my series, you're going to be like, oh, this is the end of Act 2 because this horrible thing just happened. And you can look and you're like, yep, it is in the place where that should be. And I find that really helpful to sort of have like a skeleton of the story. And as I write, that's when I start putting the flesh on.
I find that so interesting how you brought almost like your screenwriting career with you into writing, and how this kind of natural flow that we're so used to through, you know, the act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and how there's this, you know, rhythm that we kind of know of, you know, the lowest point, and this is how every story is supposed to begin and how it's supposed to end, and how it just kind of makes it more satisfying and for us to be able to feel like we're able to pinpoint things better. And I just find that so interesting. And
thank you. Yeah, it's cool. And I think it's why I like writing YA, is because screenwriting is very fast paced. If you ever read a screenplay, it's extremely fast paced. And so I love that style of writing, and that style of writing is great for YA. That's something that people gravitate towards. Even when you have adult readers, there's sort of like a controversy right now where it's like, oh, there's a lot of adult readers who want YA and are changing what YA is, or they're looking for books that are like YA, but they don't want young adults in them. It's what they're looking for is the pace. They want the fast-paced storytelling of YA. And I'm happy that that's starting to like creep into other genres.
That's very interesting.
I love that.
So kind of back to what we were talking about in terms of pressure. I think, of course, there's a lot of pressures associated with writing, personal pressures, and then later on in a writing career, exterior pressures. But teens of all ages can face pressures in any regard, whether it's school, sport, or maybe they also are aspiring authors. So what are your top 3 tips for teens to cope with pressure to perform in any situation?
Yeah, and this is a tip I give everybody. It's sort of like, don't make things worse for yourself. If you start feeling bad, that, you know, don't beat yourself up for feeling bad. Just like don't add to something that's already stressful or difficult. by making yourself feel worse. That's what I always tell myself, is like, you're allowed to feel overwhelmed by something. Don't be angry at yourself when you do get those feelings. That's okay. You're just going to spiral even more if you start beating yourself up while everyone else is too. Something that's also really helpful for me is having a routine. And like you were talking about, like taking those baby steps every day, especially if you have a goal that you're working towards. The baby steps are so important. And also having like that little routine or ritual or that thing that gets you in the mood to do the thing you have to do. I know a lot of writers will have, a specific candle that they light when they're writing, and that really helps them. For me, I write Monday to Friday during the day. I don't work on the weekends, and I really treat it like a 9 to 5 job, or like a 10 to 5 job. But having a routine is super, super important for me. And then for teens with pressure, what I look back on now, and I remember how so many things felt like the end of the world. And now in hindsight, I think, oh my God, that didn't matter at all. So I hope, I know it's really hard to take that in and internalize that kind of advice. But the really important things right now is like developing good habits and like good social habits, good work habits, good reading habits, those sort of things, and laying the groundwork for yourself to be like a really productive and vital member of society later. I think that's really important. Grades obviously are important when you get to high school, but now in hindsight, I'm like, in middle school, they did not matter at all.
I know, I'm the same way. I'm in high school this year, and I've just been like, wow, I wish that when I was younger, like even like 2 to 3 years ago, I had enjoyed my time more, and even in high school still developing those like good study habits as well as like work life school balance habits. And so I really love that, because it's true, like we often put so much pressure on ourselves, and there's already enough pressure from parents and friends and social expectations, and then on top of that, to add pressure and weight onto yourself, I think it's kind of a natural instinct to kind of be like, whoa, I should be like them, or I should be like this person, or if
comparing yourself to other people is also terrible. I'm really happy I did not grow up with social media. Like Facebook was just becoming a thing when I was late in high school. So I can't imagine what having access to social media does and how that has changed social situations for teenagers. But absolutely, comparison is horrible. And I know we all do it, but I would just say, like, please don't compare yourself to someone else, especially when it's through social media, because it's just a highlight reel. Like, everyone is choosing what they show you. Even people who you think are really genuine, like myself included, I am very much choosing what I am putting out there to give you a specific image of me. And everyone is doing that. So just like keep that in mind. I'm also from a really small town where I went to high school and graduated with the same people I went to kindergarten with. And there's definitely the people who like, oh, the glory days were high school, and that's fine. And mine were not. And now I am living my best life. So if you're one of those people who's like, oh, high school sucks, that is very okay.
I get it. It's so hard. There's so much to navigate, and also like everyone's kind of going through it. And so like there's that bit of grace.
That's true. That's a good point. Everyone is going through it, even the ones you think you aren't.
Exactly. But I really like what you said about social media, because it's true, like it is a highlight reel, and at the same time I don't think it's fair for us to expect people to be posting all of their life and all their struggles and challenges on there. And so we need to think about like, would I post like my toughest times on Instagram?
And also sometimes I'll be like watching an Instagram like reel or a TikTok, and I'm like, is this always going to be 100% true, and kind of fact checking with yourself, because instead of just accepting everything you see online as real, asking yourself, is it maybe possible that they found this image elsewhere, or that,
That's a really good point. And I hope like media literacy, I think we're having an issue with media literacy, and I hope it's something that is taught in schools more now, because it's the same as like when I was growing up and you would get our parents being like, oh my God, I saw this thing. And you're like, that's a lie. Or like the Facebook post where you think that's not real, and now it's everywhere.
Totally. Yeah, it's so easy to just believe something because somebody tells it to you, but if it's like a fact, make sure you go fact check it on Google or another website, and just make sure that what you are choosing to believe is true. And I know that, because of all this pressure sometimes, or, you starting your book, And that must be a lot of pressure to all of a sudden now say, I need to start writing this book.
And it's hard because you're looking ahead at like a full project.
Exactly.
So often we just don't even want to start.
Exactly. How do you start?
It's funny. Writing a book is like climbing a mountain. And the first draft is always the biggest mountain, but there are lots of other mountains after it that you still have to climb. And each one gets a little bit lower. But right now I am starting a new book and I'm standing at the bottom of the biggest mountain. And I'm really excited about the work. Like this is a story that I'm loving and I'm having so much fun with. And that's important to like find the fun part of it. I'm really lucky in that I get to pay my bills doing something I am so passionate about that I've wanted to do my whole life. Like I feel like an astronaut who gets to go to the moon kind of thing. But it's still a job, and treating it like a job helps me do the work. So right now I'm standing at the bottom and I'm structuring what the path is going to be. I'm someone who always has to write lists and check things off and kind of give myself the gold sticker of you did it. So right now I'm working on the outline of the book. We do have to sell it still, so I have that ahead of me, but I'm excited for that process. So I think whenever you're facing something daunting, find the exciting thing in it. I also, I'm motivated because this is my job and I want to keep doing my job forever. And with our books, you kind of got to keep doing that if you want to stay in the mix.
For sure. I think that, it definitely can be daunting, but just looking for that small bit of excitement and, saying, I love this one point in story, or I love this one point in my soccer game, or I love this one point in what you're afraid of doing, and just kind of using that as like your guiding light and following that is just such a great like push to get you started, because then as soon as you start climbing that really tall mountain, you're able to like turn back a little bit and say, I can keep going.
For sure.
And how do you come up with these amazing and complicated creative ideas? Do you brainstorm? Do they tend to come naturally, or is there another way?
Both. I've definitely had ideas kind of hit me out of nowhere. Red Queen hit me when I was at my student worker job, and I had this like image of a girl in an arena who was going to be executed, but she electrocutes her executioner. And I was like, whoa, what is this idea? And who is this person? And every question I asked led to another question. And then it was clear, this is a story. It's definitely a book, and it's definitely a YA book. And then I went from there. But I've had other ideas hit me when I'm in like a museum exhibit, when I'm out walking my dog and listening to music. I listen to music a lot in regards to choreographing scenes, specifically if I'm writing like a big battle scene or a really emotional scene. I will listen to songs that I think are along the lines of those moments, and it'll start sparking ideas as if I'm watching the movie of that scene in my head. And that really helps me brainstorm. And I come back with like, oh, I can't wait to write that part. And I will replay it over and over in my head and kind of chisel away at it and let it spark other ideas. The book I'm working on right now actually came out of another book idea when I realized, because there were several different parts of that story. And I was like, oh no, this part is its own thing. It's a lot bigger than what I thought it was. It's its own book. And then I went to my agent and was like, I actually have this idea too. And it's clicking much faster, and it's revealing itself to me in a much bigger way. And she was like, that is your idea. That the other one is not the book you're writing right now. This is the book you're writing right now. So that's where I am.
That's amazing.
And I love how, you're not afraid to adapt and kind of like switch what you're doing, because sometimes that's what's happening. We're doing something and then another opportunity arises kind of through what we're working on right now, whether it's we discover a new interest that we have, or maybe there's another club or whatever it is that we're working on, or book idea in your case. And so like not being afraid to pivot is so fundamental, I think.
Yeah. It's really nice also to have someone who is your sounding board, who can validate the choice, because I sort of thought, oh, wait, I think I want to do this. But then to have my agent say, no, you're right. This is clearly hitting faster for you. Let's go in this way. That's so nice. Because then you kind of feel like, ooh, I don't have to make the whole decision myself.
For sure. I think that definitely having somebody that you trust that's able to give you advice is so amazing. And I mean, Red Queen definitely is an amazing book that gained so much popularity really fast. But what inspired the creation of this amazing, detailed dystopian world?
Well, once I had that first idea, remember, at that point in time, I was still so Hunger Games in the brain, but I was also a really big fan of Game of Thrones. And I had been reading those books before the show came out and then finished them as the show was happening. And I was just enamored of the way that that world worked as well. And so I kind of combined the two. I knew we were in a dystopia, sort of like post-apocalyptic world that I wanted to kind of use as the flavor and the shading. And as you go further into the stories, you kind of realize, oh, wait, I think this is our world in the future. So we can mirror a lot of things while also maintaining that sort of like political element of Game of Thrones that has a lot more of a grim situation going on, and keeping that tension with the audience of making you not trust me and sort of be worried for everybody while the world is expanding and the story is getting bigger. So approaching it from those two angles. And then, of course, the superpowers, I was very much thinking of like X-Men in my head, but also a little bit of Pokemon with like the elemental powers and thinking, who would be good fighting against who kind of thing. It was sort of just picking the flavors of stories that I loved and worlds that I loved and trying to make it into something of my own.
I love that. We were talking to this really amazing person and they said everything that you create, I mean, it can be something similar like, Game of Thrones and Hunger Games, and you kind of combine it and you make it your own. And it doesn't matter if it's a combination of different things. In the end, it will always come out and it will be your own because it's your own voice. It's your own like retelling of all of those worlds put together with new characters and these new experiences that are created out of that. And I think that's so amazing how you were able to be influenced and use those amazing different parts of your generation and your interests and put them into something so amazing. And
so speaking of inspirations and taking that from our own lives, the characters that are in your novels, especially Mayor Barrow, are incredibly complex. So how do you approach character development, and are there ever any real life inspirations behind your characters?
I mean, I feel like it's really hard to create any realistic feeling human character on the page without having any inspiration from real life. With Mare, I really wanted her to feel like a real teenager thrown into that situation, especially because it's such an extraordinary and unbelievable world. The way you get an audience to believe that place is to have believable people in it. And for her, I really wanted to nail, she's a kid and she's going to make mistakes and she's not always going to do the right thing. And she might walk down the wrong path, but she's always going to try and be true to herself. And I once I latched on to the idea that like her power was anger and her power was kind of eating away at her, I wanted to show that journey of her trying to figure out how to be herself while also being incredibly powerful and not letting it control her. So once I like locked onto that sort of linchpin of her in my mind, that was much easier. And Mare, of course, because most of the series is written from her POV, there's a lot of me in her voice as well, and things that I'm not, things that I wish I was. Whenever you're writing, especially first person, there's all these little wish fulfillment moments and times where you're like, I wouldn't say that myself, but I wish I could. So like a character like Evangeline, when I got to her, she was so fun to write because she does say what's on her mind and she does kind of not care. And she has that mean streak, but those characters are really gratifying to write. I find the characters hardest to write are the ones who are really good, and who are more noble and loyal and you think are always going to do the right thing. They can sometimes read as boring compared to the morally gray characters. So when you have readers who are like, oh, Cal's kind of boring compared to Maven, it's like, yes, but the boring guy isn't going to kill you.
It's so funny how that is.
Maybe there's a lesson there. Farley was really inspired by my best friend. Her middle name is Farley. And she has really beautiful, long blonde princess hair. And at the time, when I moved back to LA, she was my roommate. And so I kept shaving Farley's head in the book to piss her off.
That is so funny. And I love how you just kind of throw in elements of your personal life, your own aspirations or your own experiences, as well as for people that you are surrounded by. And I just find that really cool, because it's funny how our own personal life can make our way into like our art or our inspiration or even like our goals, and just how everything kind of intermeshes.
For sure. Yeah. And you know, your writing is so amazing. You're so talented. And I'm sure there are so many aspirational teen authors who are looking at you and they would love to know what your best piece of advice would be. So what do you think you would like to tell them?
Well, obviously, you know, don't beat yourself up if you haven't published a book by the time you've graduated high school. Like, that's very unrealistic, and for the most part isn't going to happen, even if you are writing something fantastic. Like, it's very rare that you would get that where it needs to go. So don't beat yourself up. Don't they make things worse for you. And remember that all of that work is never, ever going to be wasted. I would also say make sure that you are open to experiences and you're not just focused on one thing. You're not going to be able to write a realistic world that feels real and interesting if you haven't gone out and experienced certain things, or at the very least been open to them. You can always kind of tell when someone's writing something that they don't quite connect to. And also let yourself learn. You know, we have so many authors who, in the rush to get published, I feel like kind of put aside classes or experiences that they should have to become good writers. For me, when I was growing up, I didn't have creative writing classes until I got to college. But one thing I did that was sort of my first experience with writing creatively, with critique from other people, and with just letting others see my work, was I was writing fan fiction. And it's kind of like, it's almost like training wheels because it's anonymous. So I didn't feel the same level of embarrassment showing someone the work because it wasn't my name. I was definitely that kid who would write my little books and put them away, and I wouldn't even let, like, you know, my mom would say, oh, let me read. And I'm like, absolutely not. Get away from me. And so that is really hard to get over, and then want to publish your books, you know, not wanting people to see it, but then also wanting everybody to see it. So I always recommend, if you feel like you don't have a creative writing class or a place where you can get good critique from other people, try your hand at fan fiction, just so you can kind of get your feet wet with letting other people read your work, and also with figuring out what you actually like to write. That was really helpful for me for figuring out, oh, these are the kind of stories I like to tell. And also, these are the things I'm good at, and these are the things I'm bad at. Those are really good things to start to figure out.
Absolutely. And as teens, we're in such like a period of self-discovery. And so it's so important to like remember that and not, you know, look at adults who publish their books and say, oh, I want to have that right now. But also like accepting those training wheels and learning from the process, because there's so much valuable information that we can gain from just exploring our own selves and what we enjoy and what we're good at versus what we need to improve upon, and then putting that forward and pushing ourselves and, you know, truly excelling at our passions. So regarding advice, what is one piece of advice that you wish you could give your teenage self?
On the one hand, I this question is great, but I go in my head like, well, if I told myself something, it would change the future. But if I had your guarantee that it would not change the future, I would tell myself that what is making you weird now is going to make you successful later, and that you are going to find the people who you're going to connect with. So for me, I didn't really find that too much in high school. And then when I went to college, it was like, bam, I have found people who like and respect me and share the same interests with me, or don't, and I'm going to find new things that I like too. So that was always I was like, it's going to get better, and hold on to the things you love now. Don't let people, you know, make you feel bad for them, because later on, you're going to be really happy that you did.
For sure. I mean, I think high school is such a hard place because everybody is constantly trying to be almost like a little bit of like a quieter version of themselves because they're a bit scared and they're insecure. But, you know, just knowing that what makes you weird, not necessarily weird, but what makes you different, what you're really interested in that isn't exactly like everybody else's, is something that will be an amazing connector to other people when you meet people who are just like you.
And it's honestly good, because then at least if you know that bit about yourself and it makes you different from others because maybe they're just kind of blending in with everyone and trying to be similar to like the average person and like the popular crowd and whatever. At least if you have a differentiator, you're that much closer to getting to your group of people, to the people who are similar to you and truly resonating with people rather than like putting on a little facade and
for sure.
blending.
And I think personally, the people who are the most unique and the people who are genuinely interested in something and they follow that are some of the coolest people I know because they have something that motivates them. They have something that they're so interested in and that they know that this is what they want to explore and what they want to do with their life. And I think that's just so cool.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like, I think what's really important for teens to hear is, like, do what you love and that will attract the right people. But what do you think brings you a small bit of happiness in every day?
You maybe saw my dog walking around behind me. So definitely her. And I live with my husband. He's great. Every morning he makes me a lovely little cappuccino, which is just a nice little burst of something during the day, although he has a really intense espresso machine that I don't know how to work. So I only get 1 cup of coffee a day. But my little bits of happiness, I mean, it's weird to say I'm really happy when I get good work done. It feels super validating. It feels like I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. And I take that baby step forward and some level of accomplishment has been made, which is really hard to see at this point in the process when you're at the bottom of the mountain and you don't really have much. I also read. I watch a lot of television. And my lunch breaks are always spent watching whatever Bravo show was on the night before. It helps me kind of reset my brain.
I love that. I love how you are so like upfront about, you know, reading and watching TV because sometimes there can be such a stigma around like, oh, you know, but like we all watch TV and we all enjoy watching.
It's storytelling. You know, those stories are just as valid. It's all helping me and it's all inspiring me and kind of refilling the well that I have.
For sure. Do you have a quote that you love and remember? And if so, why?
So I had a professor once, and this was after I had sold my first book. And I told him, oh, you know, I just got really lucky. And he looked at me and he said, do you know what luck is? Or do you know what good luck is? And I said, no. And he said, good luck is an opportunity that you are prepared for. Bad luck is an opportunity that you are not prepared for. An opportunity came to you and you were prepared for it. And I really love that messaging because I think while luck is a massive factor in pretty much any creative industry, especially writing, it can also kind of be used as a weapon to devalue yourselves, especially female writers are constantly told like, oh, you got lucky. So putting it in that spin has been really helpful to me, and I know a lot of other writers too.
That's such a great perspective to have on like anything. It's like, you know, I put in the work and the effort, and it's not like, you know, if you had the opportunity to be published but you didn't have a finished manuscript, like it wouldn't have happened the same way. So
exactly. Just being able to give yourself credit for some work that you may not always think that you deserve.
Exactly. So as a final little note, do you have anything exciting coming up that you would like to share with us and with our audience?
Well, I'm working on a brand new book. It is an adult book. It's an adult romantic fantasy. So fingers crossed I can talk more about that once we sell it and I can kind of mention, you know, what's going on there. But I'm really excited about it. And it's kind of a nostalgia project for me. It's very much inspired by a movie that I loved when I was in middle school and high school. And people are starting to figure out what I mean by that, which is cool. And then this coming weekend, I am doing one last book festival for this part of the year. I'm going to Y'all West, which is one of the biggest YA book festivals in the country. It's in Santa Monica. And it's not just me, it's lots of other authors. And it is such a great time. They also have a sister festival in Charleston in the fall called Y'all Fest. So between California and South Carolina, we have you covered. Tons of authors. It's a lot of fun. If you guys ever get a chance to go to one of them, I definitely recommend it.
Oh my goodness.
That sounds
we will
amazing.
keep our eyes open because that sounds like an awesome time and opportunity. And is there anywhere where our audience can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on TikTok too much You can find me on Instagram and you can find me on Threads, and it's all under my name, Victoria Aveyard.
Perfect. And that will be linked in the show notes. And we just want to say thank you so much for coming on Hack Your Happiness today.
So amazing.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was lovely.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness. And thank you so much to Victoria for joining us today.
She's so inspiring, and I absolutely loved all of her insights and advice. And it was just so uplifting to speak with her today. Anastasia, what's your biggest takeaway?
I think my biggest takeaway is for sure just finding the little bit of excitement in the middle of that giant mountain that's so daunting. You're so scared to climb because right now you're at base camp, but just knowing that there's something up there that you're super excited for and you can't wait to experience or you can't wait to do, I think is such a great takeaway. What about you, Mercedes?
I love that, and I love Victoria's analogy of the mountain. I think that's such a realistic way that challenges feel at times. But my biggest takeaway from Victoria today is the fact that we should not be adding to our own pressure, you know, from family and friends and society and school and extracurriculars and beyond. There's plenty of pressures, plenty of things trying to push us forward. And so my biggest takeaway is, you know, don't add to that pressure. Be easy on yourself. Give yourself acknowledgement for your accomplishments and your achievements, and motivate yourself by, like Anastasia said and like Victoria said, finding the joy in the process.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, make sure to leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to join our happiness family so that you don't miss another episode, and we'd also love to have you. It's totally free, and you can join Hack Your Happiness by following us on whatever podcast listening platform you're on now.
See you next time!